All right, I think we're streaming live now. They've changed the interface, as Mike just noted before the call here on for Facebook Lives, which is always fun. I'm George Affleck, along with Mike Wilson here from Campaign University. And before we get to our guest, you can see here, I just want to give a bit of housekeeping to remind everybody about Monday's group call for those who have signed up for the Campaign University course and the group calls that we have every Monday. If you haven't signed up for the course or you want to know more about it, feel free to direct message Mike or myself. We can tell you more about it, or you can find out about it at thecampaignuniversity.com, and you can click the link there. It says playbook, and can find out more about the whole training that we have. We go through a lot of it in these Facebook Lives. And for those of us who got a lot of new people signing up over the last few days, a lot of US people, which is great, a lot of Canadians, and some people from the UK as well, which is fantastic. This the point of the Campaign University was really to create a structure for us to encourage great people to run for office no matter where they are on that political spectrum. And so it's great to see a real diverse group of people joining us in our Facebook group, as well as diversity in where they come from. So that's fantastic. So again, those the live call, group call on Mondays, and then if you're new to the group, check the training that's in there. You go through, scroll all the way down. We've done several months of training. If you're new, lots of great stuff in there to look if you've missed it, and it's all free. So, and you can take away lots of stuff, kind of like what we're going to learn today. I want to say welcome to Justin Bumstead, who's our guest today. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
Justin's a senior pollster and campaign consultant, worked on a ton of campaigns. And today we're diving into the fascinating world of election campaigns and the revolutionary changes technologies brought to this arena. Justin's an expert in campaign data management and passionate advocate for integrating technology in political campaigns. And he's going to share his unique insights with his experiences from his early days analyzing hockey stats to his groundbreaking work in election mapping and voter modeling. His journey is a testament to the power of data in shaping the political landscapes. He's here to discuss the latest disruptions in campaign data management, including the transforming role of AI, which we're all talking about. And I'm going to let Mike take the lead on this conversation. I'm going to monitor the chat, and please feel free to DM me if you have some specific questions that we don't get to. We try to keep this within a half an hour to keep it tight, so that because I know you guys are all busy out there. And again, if you can't watch the whole thing, we will be putting this up after the fact as a recording. So over to you, Mike and Justin.
Yeah, thanks everyone who can make it live. We know there's a vast majority of you watching the replays, and we really appreciate you. We hope you get a lot out of this training. We always talk about Campaign University in terms of teaching you all those areas of campaigning, so you're not in a situation where there's a few high-paid consultants that are telling you what is and what isn't, but you actually know what's going on. And probably no area of the campaign is more misunderstood or not understood, Justin, than the data side of the campaign, where often the candidates maybe don't even get involved in it, but it's something you really need to know about. And we're going to talk today about actually making sure all your actions are data driven. So thanks for being here, Justin. We're really excited to have you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started in data management and campaigns and polling and all things numbers and politics.
Well, it's a bit of a roundabout path. There always was that interest in elections. Originally, my first kind of involvement in that, deputy returning officer, like working on the oversight side of it, an elections clerk with Elections Canada and at the university. My background was stats, and then ended up a bit of an interesting program for grad school, GIS and remote sensing. So basically, mapping, statistics, and a lot of that is machine learning.
Right.
Kind of turns out that the path from that into politics was a supervisor that decided to change universities. So I went from doing work with basically crop insurance to statistical modeling of elections.
Oh, wow. Where was that in Ontario?
University of Calgary.
Right.
It turns out that the same math that you use to tell the difference on a satellite photo between a rock and a tree is very, very useful for telling the difference between a Democratic voter and a Republican voter in polling data.
Right. Fascinating.
Yeah, so so I was in grad school about the same time. There was a book that came out in the early 2010s, called Victory Lap, fellow by the name of Sasha Eisenberg. So at that point, there had been a lot of the stories about kind of the analytics operation and the statistical operation that the Democratic Party built in for Obama's reelection.
Right,
This was happening at the same time as, for those that saw it, the movie Moneyball.
right.
So there was the Edmonton Oilers launched a hackathon, basically putting all of their data online, and basically saying, "Hey, whoever can uh, turn this into something useful gets a job with the Oilers." They've done a couple more of those since then, and that's that whole industry has kind of taken off. But yeah, I was arguing about hockey statistics online with somebody, and that person encouraged me to get involved in a political campaign. Uh, was more and more fascinated by it, and then from there to uh, reaching out, basically cold calling U.S. campaign firms, looking for work while I was in school, and it's been a fascinating ride since then.
And you worked a couple of US elections early on. Where were those?
So a lot in the Pacific Northwest, and then New Mexico, Arizona, one or two in the Dakotas, and I think yeah, one in Hawaii. The A lot of that was the predictive modeling. So the kind of the conceptualization of basically the building probability models. What's the probability that this individual is going to be voting Democratic? What's the probability that they're actually going to vote? And kind of that view of the electorate. That was that kind of perspective on the electorate down in the States. And you still see that type of modeling on a lot of these campaigns and available from a lot of vendors down in the States.
And do you think it would surprise candidates and people how much predictive modeling is actually used to determine who the voters are and where they live and how they're going to vote?
I did not appreciate the scale of this type of work down in the States. And this is one of those things where, because so much information is available down there, uh, you can go online if you search Ohio voter file, the availability of data in the States and what can get fed into even very, very basic voter models is astonishing. And that's one of the big things now that we're seeing, the changing regulatory environments that played out from a privacy perspective after 2016, the Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, all that fun. And another conversation with what's going to play out with artificial intelligence, but that's a longer conversation. It's the scale of these operations, especially down in the U.S. It still surprises me, and it's only going to get more intensive as this technology improves.
Yeah, so for some of you who are maybe new, or you want to run for the first time, or you've been involved in a campaign but more on the comms side, more on the political side, and you're kind of unknown how the whole data world works, so, basically from a high level perspective, anywhere you're running an election, there's a list of every voter. You have a certain amount of data on all those voters. You have emails or phone numbers, perhaps addresses. And the more data you can get that Justin's talking about loaded into that machine, how they voted before, how their family votes, how wealthy they are, what they eat for dinner, everything in between, you're able to kind of model and know who they are and where you're going to want to do your outreach and knock on doors and all that. So it's an incredibly complex field. And it happens in every single election where you have a list of every voter in the area that you're running, and you need to analyze them. And that's what Justin's an expert at, and that's what we're going to kind of dive into. So in that world of data analysis, Justin, what are you seeing right now? You talked a little bit about the disruptions that are going on, that are changing. It used to be you would need to hire like a big company, or you'd have the whole Democratic firm or the whole Republican firm, and they have this, very expensive software, this quite complex system that you would need in order to run in any election. But the access to technology is much easier nowadays, and the prices have gone way down. What sort of disruptions are you seeing?
So the one really interesting thing, it's for a lot of campaigns, and this goes for not just Canada, the US, but for so many jurisdictions, it's the lower barriers to entry. So a lot of the technology that had previously only really been available that had been built in essentially for the larger political parties, like
Right.
your national parties or your provincial parties. Those tools are now, as there's been more entrance into the industry, whether it's the advocacy groups or other groups like that, the foundational cost of the technology to get up and running for any campaign is getting easier and easier. And as well, as the oversight bodies, like as the elections regulators in different jurisdictions, the quality of those voter files, so the quality of the list of electors and the information that's contained there, their processes are improving. So you've got better foundational data, and you've got cheaper and more accessible technology that's easier and easier to get started. So rather than a very drawn out process to get the technology you would need for a campaign up and running, it's that process is getting simpler and simpler and cheaper, allowing campaigns to take what had previously been part of that budget and apply it to other operations or other pieces of the puzzle.
Or using that data to phone call or text or do outreach, right? So, you know, what Justin's talking about is, for me in my career, I remember elections where it would cost $40,000, you know, in municipal elections to set up a software system, upload the voter file, which was very poor, as you're saying, buy other data to try and augment it, and then make it an actionable system. So all in, you're looking at $55,000. Nowadays, you can get a subscription service from a good data management company. There's a lot of different ones out there. That could be just like a monthly fee of a few $100s. And then you add, you know, a canvassing app that's $10, $20 a month that allows you to go to doors and input all the data. So what was $50,000 is all of a sudden, you know, a few hundred if you have a small enough campaign. And you can imagine that means the parties and the big structures are kind of losing their power, and it's democratizing elections like never before. So I think this is a massive disruption that we have yet to really see, especially when you're thinking about independent candidates or like school board campaigns or small city council campaigns or state senate campaigns, which normally were you know, kind of offshoots of the big party, where now maybe the candidates and the local campaigns can take on way more control and way more responsibility.
Definitely, yeah. And that's the thing, and it's a lot of the technology, the sophistication that used to just be the jurisdiction of these large organizations. Even your smallest campaigns at the most local level, can run with a level of technical sophistication that would have been astonishing and unheard of a decade ago.
Yeah, totally crazy. And so what are you seeing in terms of like tactics as we see this shift in the marketplace where data is really getting democratized in a way like it's never before? What tactics on the ground or in campaigns? Like, I know you're really close to the modeling and the sophistication around there, but what are you seeing change in the last couple of years in terms of taking data and making it, you know, really actionable at the campaign level?
So the one thing that has really jumped out, it's there's the foundations of political campaigns haven't really changed in the last 150 years. There's an old line from Abraham Lincoln. It's a campaign is simple: find your people, find out the ones that support you, and when it comes time to election day, encourage them to go and vote. And that's one of the quotes that works its way around the different campaign trainings. I've heard that from a bunch of different spots, and it's at a foundational level, that's still true.
Right.
Where we're moving now, and this is part of it, as the quality of, say, those canvassing apps improves, or the quality of the databases improve, or your other communications tools, it's rather than simply the question of can I count on your vote? Can I count on your support? It's the deeper questions of the why. What is it that drives that voting decision? What are the issues? What are their concerns? And then the ability to shape the persuasion aspect of it. So
Right.
rather than simply that yes, no, can I count on your support? It's for those that aren't sure, greater ability to persuade people, and to those that might be on the fence, those that might be uncertain about. It's been a fascinating couple of years in pretty much every country. There's new issues that are front and center all across the world in different jurisdictions, and that question of why, that question of what is it that drives that voting decision, the campaigns are more and more able to take on that complexity and move into the persuasion aspect in a way that had never really been the case before.
Right. So instead of just asking people, are you voting for us? You find out why they're voting for you, and then you really amplify that and try and make other people that are similar to that person also vote for you using those motives. Or you could do the other way around. If you find they're voting for your opponent, what's driving that vote? And then you could try and counter. So really digging into those like emotional drivers or pocketbook drivers, or what is under the decisions. And how do you actually do that in the data? Just asking more sophisticated questions?
Yep, and a big part of that, it's the getting into good habits early on, having good data structures on issues, sub-issues, knowing what it is that, like, having that understanding from a strategic perspective. And that's where the polling and the research side of it is so critical. It's the what is the nature of this moment? What is the nature of the situation right now in this electoral district or in this congressional district? What are we up against? What are these people? How do they see the world? And how do we respond to that? How do we meet them? How do we meet them at their level? How do we meet them where they're at? And that's where on one hand, it's the good data management practices up front make it that much simpler as the campaign progresses. But at the same time, it's that balance. It's the not biting off more than you can chew, recognizing that, okay, on one hand, it's the deeper you go, the more effective you can be in that persuasion, where if you have undecided voters, or you have soft support, somebody that might be leaning towards you, but somebody that isn't sure, what is it that drives that sale? And then the more, as you said, the more complex aspect of it, it's if we know that a lot of people of specific demographics are very concerned about this particular issue, being able to find people that resemble them with a lot more of these newer targeting tools that are becoming available.
Yeah, it's crazy and so complex, but we talk a lot in the course, Justin, about like analyzing where you're running in the demographics, and really, like you're saying, start with a foundation based on data where you're actually deciding your main issues based on these drivers that we're talking about. What matters to the people where you're running, and what's your position on it? How does that compare to your opponent? And making sure you're not just like intuitively doing this, but you have numbers that actually back that up. But you talked a little bit, like, let's say, I mean, this is great, and you've been doing this your whole life, and I, like you, have a math background and have been involved in polling all the time. If you're just a new candidate and you want to run for the first time, how do you start? Like, how do you set up a system in a simple way? Like, what's some just basic advice you could give to someone who's starting a campaign and say, hey, do these fundamental things to make sure your data is going to be useful for you, and in a way that it's not overwhelming and you just have too much that you can't, because the other problem we see a lot is people have these massive data campaigns, but they have no ability to execute, and actually do anything with it. So what advice would you give for like the basic fundamentals of setting a campaign up?
Yeah, and there's a line that pops up every now and then. It's analysis paralysis. It's the overthinking the task in front of you, and the not letting the perfect get in the way of the good.
Right.
Ultimately, like at the core of it, the first thing that I nudge any candidate, it's the candidate and campaign manager rather, it's the sit down with a calendar, map out what the timelines look like, map out the specific stages of the campaign, because the data you collect, you need to have a plan for how you're going to utilize it.
Right.
There's no point collecting it if you don't have those specific actionable steps as to what you're going to be able to do with it, when you're going to be able to do it, and what it's going to take to make that happen. There's another old line from there's three things in politics you never have enough of: time, treasure, and talent. But the one thing that you can never get back is time. if you're working within, say, a 6-month cycle or a 3-month cycle, the ability to generate new literature pieces, the ability to your events, your communications pieces, your volunteer calling, your canvassing, every one of those pieces of the puzzle is going to take time. And having that mapped out to know that if you have, say, 1 month that you can do your voter ID and your data collection, so if say in week one you're doing you're collecting your issue information, then what is the plan on how you're actually going to be able to utilize that for persuasion?
Right.
Because there's no point having having the data if there's not a way to utilize it. And
Right.
that's where it's that strategic culture of that it's that strategic planning where it's what specifically are we looking to achieve? What do we think that we as a campaign have the capacity to achieve? Because again, the finite numbers of volunteers, finite numbers of resources, and limited time. So how can we make the most effective use of that time?
Yeah, and it can be because I've worked in a lot of bootstrap campaigns, small campaigns, as well as national, hundreds of millions of dollars. But in the smaller campaigns, you may find out, okay, 30% of the people are voting for us, 30% are voting for the opponent, and there's around 30% kind of soft supporting or in the middle. But there's an issue in our campaign that's massively important to that middle 30%. And so maybe you don't have the people that can go knock on the door and persuade that 30%, but at least you're able to take a really hard position or strong position, clear position on that issue that's going to draw that 30%, to you and away from your opponent. So, there's ways to make, even with if you're getting good data, there's ways to make it actionable and act on it, even if you don't have crazy amount of resources to call all those people you've identified and try and persuade them personally. So yeah, I just wanted to encourage everyone, even if you don't have a massively resourced campaign, you still should be making data-driven decisions where you're seeing numbers and they're saying to you, hey, you need to say something about this, or you need to do something about this, especially trends in numbers.
And on that point, the one big upside that and it's been a very recent lesson that I've come across. It's how quickly on those longer campaigns, having good foundational data, if it is necessary to pivot, having that good data will make it easier for you to do so.
Right.
As we've seen the last couple of years, a lot of unexpected wrinkles that have popped up at different points over the past few years. The one example I'll point to, in early 2021, there was one of the atmospheric rivers, a unique weather phenomenon on the West Coast, wiped out a whole bunch of highways in and around parts of British Columbia. And what we ended up seeing was the issue of climate change spike in a lot of those specific areas, where it's areas that had previously been focused on something else, but needing to recognize that, okay, in these areas, because of what's happening outside of our control, these are the voters that are now much more concerned about this new issue because of what's playing out in their backyard. So that awareness of your broader strategic environment, the better data you've got, the more able you'll be to respond if something like that does happen.
Yeah, totally. And we were talking before we went on. I was working in 2008, the federal election, and in the middle of the stock market crash, what a crazy disruption that was in changing voter intentions. And so when people are setting this data system up, if you're a first-time candidate or going into a bigger campaign, what are some mistakes that you can just caution people from avoiding?
So the first one would be the failure to have a plan. Taking the time to actually plan out what it is that your campaign looks like. What are your voting dates? What are your advanced voting dates? when are your debates? What are the key events that are going to play out that you can prepare for? Because from a communications perspective, there's the proactive side of it, and there's also the reactive side of it. And
Right.
the more of the proactive components that you can build out up front, that leaves you with a better ability to respond when things go sideways. So that would be number one. And part of that, though, it's the failing to create a data-driven culture within a campaign. So everybody that's involved in a campaign is there for a different reason. But at the same time, though, it's the reason why everybody's there for a common purpose. And what that means, though, if you have parts of your campaign team that recognize the importance of this and parts that don't, it's missed opportunities. And say your tour team, or like your folks that are guiding your communications or guiding the digital side of it. If the folks that are managing the online side of the campaign are collecting information that exists in a silo and never makes its way into the broader campaign, that's the type of stuff that does become a missed opportunity. And in a lot of these races where it is smaller numbers, a half dozen, a dozen, 2 dozen votes can make a big difference. I had the misfortune of a very good candidate in the Alberta election earlier this year that we fell short by 7 votes on initial count. And in those moments, it's always what more could we have done? What are the steps that we could have taken? And unfortunately, you learn the hardest lessons are always the most valuable to learn. And it's if there is that data-driven culture where each component recognizes that whether it's your communications, whether it's your digital, whether it's the teams on the ground that are guiding canvassing, all of that data is valuable in its own way, and making sure that all ties back to your core strategic purpose, which is finding your people and getting them out to vote.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how the different facets of the campaign can almost sometimes, instead of working together, just start to fight with each other for resources, and it falls apart really quickly.
Yeah, and that's where it's the good internal communication, and it's the not necessarily data side of it, but it's the information in the broader sense, ensuring that all components of your campaign are rowing in the same direction, that whether it's the business cards that your candidate might be collecting at events with contact information and follow-up, whether it's your canvassers at the door that are finding undecided voters that might be persuadable, but are really curious about a specific issue. That type of information, where it's the follow-up email or the follow-up phone call, or even just finding areas of concern that the team may not have thought of, those specific issues that may have been overlooked by, especially in the larger districts and the larger campaigns, those kind of unique and niche opportunities and issues that if the canvassers on the ground are finding this, having those processes so that your central campaign teams can respond and can adapt. And if you need to add additional pieces to your website, or you need to come up with messaging around new policy, being able to adapt and to respond.
Right, totally. And got a few questions here. One before I want to talk about AI, because we're all seeing, I put out an article about it the other day, just massive changes and speed, the speed at which everything is happening with AI, which I don't think anyone realizes how that's going to affect the next campaigns. Like, it's so easy to turn around an article or a policy or a video or anything now compared to what it used to be. How is that? Do you see it affecting data and data management and data analysis in campaigns?
So it's a fascinating question, and it's one that as you said, the speed. So there's a finite amount of time for a campaign to work with, and the AI is going to be fantastic for that proactive side of the content, whether it's as you said, drafting outbound emails. So the regular emails that go out from a campaign, updating volunteers on what the campaign's up to, inviting people to events, encouraging them to get out and vote, encouraging them to vote in advance polls. A lot of that work, these AI tools are absolutely fantastic for it.
Right.
And as these tools improve, the next steps with it, where it's as you said, assisting in drafting policy, drafting the communication plans. So drafting communication plans surrounding a specific policy, speech writing.
Right.
Speech writing is one that's gotten very, very interesting. Basically being able to, if you have existing communication pieces from your candidate, being able to draft additional pieces in the tone and style of that candidate.
Already, I'm already doing that.
And it's fascinating to see in the other pieces of it, from a research perspective. So a lot of the tasks that used to be far more time consuming, like the matching lists in Excel, lists of phone numbers versus something else, being able to connect those pieces, would previously be a little bit of tedious code, can be done much, much simpler now in these tools. So it's for, say, campaign dashboards, the ability to, in looking at the data that you have in your systems, being able to run better analyses quicker, and being able to keep a much closer finger on the pulse of what's happening in your district. The stuff that's going to get very, very interesting, and it's the areas like, say, AI-driven chatbots for persuasion and for voter ID, being able to feed in content from a campaign. There was a recent campaign done in New Zealand where some of this stuff was field tested, where it's rather than volunteers answering questions, it's the going to a website greeted by a friendly bot that could speak in great depth on the party policy on healthcare, the party policy on climate change, the party policy on crime and justice, and other topics. And the ability of those tools to provide much deeper answers than volunteers that may not necessarily have that depth of background.
Yeah, completely crazy. And I know some jurisdictions are looking at not even allowing that. So you're not allowed to have a bot, send an email or text message, or whereas some, it's going to be a free for all. And that could change county by county, really depending on the electoral group. So we're going to go do some questions now. Thanks so much, Justin. That's fascinating topic to touch. I'm sure it's so many questions for everyone. One that I got was, what would you like? What makes a good data management person on your campaign? Like, what should you look for when you're hiring one? And then also, what makes a bad one that you should avoid?
Well, I say this from my own experience and the lessons that I've learned. Make sure you can find somebody that can communicate. A lot of people with technical backgrounds speak a different language than a lot of folks with communications backgrounds or policy backgrounds. So being able to communicate and being able to ensure that it's not just the data management side existing on in its own little silo, that you have teams that are all speaking the same language, and that internal communication aspect of it is absolutely critical. So finding data management people that can speak to policy, can speak to communications, can offer the type of analytics and advice that is going to be useful for those broader strategic objectives.
Right.
Ultimately, like the data management side of it provides a pretty solid foundation for strategic decision making. So finding folks that understand the data that's being collected and how that fits into the broader strategic plan. So it's every component of the campaign all comes back to that same strategic plan, and good data management people understand that and build systems and structures that can contribute to that.
Right. And then I guess the bad ones operate in a silo and don't communicate well.
I've seen that, and when I was younger, I learned important lessons about not doing that.
I've seen amazing, one campaign I worked on, the pollster and the central campaign were, saying this thing's going sideways and it's going so bad and I can't imagine what's happening. And then the head data manager was sitting there saying, no, this is totally fine. We're in the bag. Like nothing I see is worrying. We have the votes basically. And he was right. And the rest of the campaign was wrong. And just being able to communicate, to trust that person and know what they're seeing in the numbers rather than start to panic, or to trust that person and start to panic rather than think you're doing well, is so important in the campaign. How about you, George? Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a few questions here. I just want to get to those because we're tight on time here. But Karen has asked, because you have actually experience in both countries, Canada and US, she wondered what the difference was between the analysis and acquisition of data in Canada versus US.
Well, and the big point on that, it's the regulatory environment, and this is one thing that is going to get more and more important as things change. There's a lot more restrictions, especially as it relates to privacy in Canada. Limitations on how data can be held and how it can be utilized. The one point that does jump out, especially, and a big part of this is simply scale. 350 million people in the United States. You've got politics almost has become an industry where you have enough scale and enough campaigns and the consistency of campaigns that there's more and more firms that do this full time, that exist solely in the political campaigning space, where that's far less common in Canada, simply because the fewer elections, smaller scale, the amount of money that gets spent per voter, say, on a national campaign in Canada, is a fraction of what it is for a presidential campaign in the States. And what we're going to see in the 2024 cycle down in the States, rather, is going to be a massive operation. So that scale allows improvements in technology, the professionalism, and a lot of things that, well, we aspire to that in Canadian politics. It's the reality of the limits on scale, and just a difference in political culture, where it's the US, where it is two parties and perhaps a lot more heated at times, I think would be one point.
Although we're trying to change it in Canada, aren't we?
Intentionally.
Yeah. The other question related to the AI, and maybe this also relates to Canada versus US. I know that there's regulation that they're trying to catch up. Governments are trying to keep up with the massive speed at which AI is impacting it. It seems like the US is a bit ahead of Canada, maybe because they're more afraid of it. But the other question I think that came up was related to the negative parts. You talked about how we can use AI in a positive way, but if you rely on AI too much, you could really screw up. You could really, especially on a bot situation, that bot could say the wrong thing and suddenly your campaign's in a PR crisis.
Yeah, and that's on one hand, we have a situation where, like, in, say, the research and polling side of it, the ability to collect more data more quickly, analyze it, and draw actionable insight from it. The AI systems are fantastic for that, and are going to allow us to draw deeper insight. There's a firm out of the UK now doing AI-driven focus groups. So focus groups at scale, driven with AI moderators. But on the downside, and this is a couple of the risks that we're going to run into. Number one is on the media side of it. AI-driven news, or the communications tools that, like the bots that would exist on Twitter or on Facebook, the ability for troublesome actors to push out misinformation quickly and at scale is something that there's a lot of folks, especially with the presidential election coming up in the States, that are very, very worried about this. And it's the fake images, video, like fake video, fake audio, that side of it, the potential for misuse is going to be there, and that's where that's going to come down to the legislative side of it, and everybody coming to the table in good faith to say, hey, this is too important a topic. We need to ensure that we're all on the same page and all recognizing that for our own sake, we need to do this right.
Another question related, you mentioned a book, Hacking the Electorate. Are there any other, somebody asked about, DM me about other books that you recommend that people might want to pick up that will help them, or listen to if you're into audiobooks, that will help them plan? You've given us a lot of info today, and we'll give your email at the end here, but any books you recommend that people can really get into and help them?
Yeah, so the one I mentioned called Hacking the Electorate, the fellow that wrote that ran the analytics program for Obama's re-election campaign in 2012, and it really dives into a lot of the details and kind of how the data informs the strategy. So that's an absolutely fantastic book. Another one would be The Victory Lab. That one was from quite some time ago, but that's more kind of a written more as it's an easy read. It talks about a lot of the new technology and kind of how that has played out in that time frame. From a communications perspective, there's one that was fantastic. It's he was a speechwriter. He was a Yale psychologist. It's called The Political Brain, and the author is Drew Weston. But that one, talks about how voters view information, and how everything from personality and values shapes how we view political communication. So those three books are absolutely fantastic, and regardless of whether you're a candidate, a campaign manager, or just interested, definitely a very worthwhile read.
Fantastic. For those who couldn't get to those questions, or if you're watching this as a recording, pop your questions in there. Mike and I are always monitoring the questions, and if there's something that's really interesting, and we'll reach out to Justin for you and get that answer if we can. This has been amazing, Mike. Really, you dig deep. I was like Mike, you take this one because this is your world, data. This has been really fascinating, and we really appreciate. If you want to reach out to Justin, his email is justin@ftnfn.io. That's ftnfn.io. So if you want to reach out to him, if you're running a campaign and you need somebody who's an expert at data analysis, he's your guy, and polling. Back over to you, Mike, to wrap it up there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Justin. Thanks so much for being on. Everyone, if you have other questions too, DM George and us. We're here to help. And this is a very complex topic, and it's complex math, and but it really, really matters. And I think when we started Campaign University, this was one area where our motto of kind of learn everything, make sure you know everything going on in a campaign. You don't want to avoid this just because it's too complicated. You want to make sure you understand it at a deep enough level that you're able to at least know if your campaign's doing a good job at it or a bad job at it, and at least make it actionable for yourself. So I think you really touched on that today, Justin. So thank you so much. We'll see everyone next time. We really appreciate you sticking through it or watching it later on, and we'll catch you on the next one.